Our small American town was always quiet, with nothing much happening to disturb our peaceful lives. I remember it vividly, as if it were yesterday. The sun cast long shadows over the golden leaves, and there was a crisp chill in the air. It was a perfect Halloween season, the kind we all looked forward to. But this year, Halloween would bring with it a darkness that no one could have anticipated. John and Susan Buckley were known to everyone in town. They lived with their elderly mother, Mary, in a dilapidated house on the edge of town. The Buckleys were an odd pair, to say the least. John, in his mid-30s, was a tall, gaunt man with piercing blue eyes that always seemed to be observing, calculating. Susan, a few years younger, had an air of perpetual discontent about her. She rarely smiled, and when she did, it was more of a grimace than an expression of joy. The Buckleys kept to themselves, rarely interacting with the other townsfolk. Mary, their mother, was the only one who ever ventured out, usually to buy groceries or attend church. She was a sweet, frail woman who had seen better days. Her health was failing, and she often looked exhausted, as if the weight of the world was pressing down on her thin shoulders. Despite their reclusiveness, the Buckleys were not unfriendly. They simply preferred solitude, or so we thought. Halloween was a big event in our town. Every year, families would go all out with their decorations, turning their homes into eerie spectacles of ghosts, goblins, and other worldly creatures. It was a tradition that brought the community together, a night when the ordinary became extraordinary and the mundane transformed into the magical. The Buckleys had never participated in the Halloween festivities before, which is why their sudden enthusiasm for the holiday that year caught everyone off guard. In early October, the Buckleys began decorating their house. At first, it was nothing unusual, a few carved pumpkins, some cobwebs, and a couple of skeletons. But as the days went by, their display grew more elaborate and disturbingly realistic. By the time Halloween night arrived, their house was the talk of the town. People came from all over to see the Buckleys' masterpiece. The centerpiece of their display was a headless mannequin dressed in a tattered old dress holding an axe. It stood on the front porch, surrounded by other gruesome props, severed limbs, bloodied knives, and a cauldron that appeared to be filled with boiling blood. The attention to detail was astonishing. The mannequin's body was covered in what looked like real blood and gore, and the sight of it sent shivers down the spines of even the bravest among us. John and Susan stood proudly on their porch, welcoming the steady stream of visitors who came to admire their work. They smiled and chatted with everyone, answering questions about how they had created such a realistic display. I remember standing there, feeling a mix of awe and unease. Something about the mannequin felt too real, too lifelike, but I brushed it off as a trick of the mind, a product of the eerie atmosphere they had so meticulously crafted. As the night wore on, more and more people began to share my unease. Whispers spread through the crowd about the mannequin's unsettling realism. Some claimed they could see veins beneath the skin. Others swore they saw the chest rise and fall, as if it were breathing. The longer we stood there, the more our discomfort grew, but it wasn't until the smell hit us that we realized something was terribly wrong. A putrid, decaying odor began to emanate from the porch. It was faint at first, barely noticeable over the smell of autumn leaves and bonfires, but it grew stronger, more pungent, until it was impossible to ignore. People started to back away, covering their noses and exchanging worried glances. The sense of dread was palpable. Mr. Thompson, a burly man with a reputation for being fearless, decided to investigate. He approached the mannequin, his face twisted in a grimace from the stench. He reached out and touched the figure's arm, and his eyes widened in horror. He stumbled back, his hand trembling as he pointed at the mannequin. "It's a body," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the growing murmur of the crowd. Panic erupted. People screamed and ran, trying to get as far away from the Buckleys' house as possible. The sheriff, who had been patrolling the area, rushed over and took charge. He ordered everyone to stay back as he approached the porch, his face set in a grim mask. John and Susan didn't move. They stood there, watching the chaos unfold with an almost serene detachment. When the sheriff reached the porch, he carefully examined the mannequin. His expression shifted from disbelief to horror as he realized the truth. The headless figure was indeed a human body, the mutilated corpse of Mary Buckley. The sheriff immediately called for backup, and within minutes the Buckleys were surrounded by deputies. But then something strange happened. As the deputies approached to arrest John and Susan, they noticed something unusual. The Buckleys were still smiling, as if they knew something we didn't. In the confusion, as people crowded around trying to get a glimpse of what was happening, The Buckleys seized their opportunity. They slipped away into the darkness, disappearing before anyone realized what was happening. By the time the sheriff and his deputies organized a proper search, John and Susan Buckley were gone, vanished without a trace. The investigation that followed was exhaustive. Every possible lead was pursued, but the Buckleys had covered their tracks well. It was as if they had planned their escape as meticulously as they had planned the murder. Despite the efforts of the authorities and the vigilance of the townsfolk, John and Susan Buckley were never seen again. Our town was left reeling from the horror of that Halloween night. The Buckleys' house was abandoned, left to rot and crumble as a grim reminder of their twisted crime. People spoke of the Buckleys in hushed tones, their story becoming a cautionary tale for generations to come. Every Halloween, as we decorated our homes and carved our pumpkins, we couldn't help but remember the horror that had once walked among us. The Buckleys had managed to get away with their heinous act, leaving behind a legacy of fear and suspicion. Their plan to blend in with the festivities had worked, but it also left us with a haunting reminder that evil can hide behind the most ordinary of faces, and it's a story I'll never forget. And so, every year, as the leaves turn golden and the nights grow longer, I tell the story of the Buckleys to anyone who will listen. It's a story that needs to be remembered, a cautionary tale about the evil that can hide behind closed doors and the importance of trusting our instincts when something doesn't feel right, because in the end, it was our collective unease that uncovered the Buckleys' horrifying secret. And it's that same sense of awareness that will keep us safe in the future. The Buckleys may have vanished, but their legacy lives on, a dark stain on our town's history. And as long as we tell their story, we can ensure that such evil will never again take root in our community. The fear they left behind remains, a chilling reminder of the darkness that can hide in plain sight. Thanks for tuning in, Dark Copers. Remember, not all monsters hide in the shadows. Some live among us. Stay vigilant, stay safe, and until next time, keep embracing the darkness.